what we want to share today is really just more building on the last conversations that we've had, thinking about what we heard in the last MPC session, the community conversation, and then how that starts to build into some ideas of a potential framework for thinking about evaluating the steps forward. And it's really, really useful to have the conversation we just had, fresh in our minds as we look at all of what we're sharing today. The last conversation we had is all of these are always adding and building on more ideas, clearer ideas, stronger directions, I think. We had a lot of great conversation last time about just, returning to this reality of the power of the falls, the power of water, the river, and all that means as an underlying bigger thing than the recent disruption. I think that we keep coming back to that language of this is a disruption, not an erasure. And John, I appreciated what you were saying just moments ago about, that bigger continuity. There's something, bigger there that wasn't fully taken away. So that's fresh in our minds. Some really great discussions too about decolonizing versus indigenizing. And Mona, you had some great ways of sharing with this group. Again, getting to that bigger, more fundamental truth and underlying truth, and what does that mean to build relation with that and connections? I think that was one thing that we kept coming back to in this conversation as well. This is about building connections, building and deepening, renewing relationship, and that can happen in many different ways. The community conversation was another rich discussion. Just coming back to that power of starting with the river. I think every conversation we've had, whenever we've started to trend away from that, always coming back to the river is the center, and thinking about building off of that. Kian had some great points about Indigenous water programs. As we start to get into public discussions for this project around what happens here, what should happen here, what could happen here, I think it's really, really important that we continue to come back to program activity for a place like this isn't a few different recreational options. This is a whole different idea about what a land relationship can be, what this land can be, what this place can be. So I think there's a lot of richness that has come through this last community conversation as well. And I won't go through every point on this. We'll be sharing this out, and I think summaries have already been shared out. But again, coming back to the water, coming back to access, experience, and connection building around that, and not just from a human perspective. So what we've been doing is thinking through these 4 key themes that were developed collectively: restoring a story disrupted, the power of this place to build connections, and water is life. And this idea of a place to continue a conversation, really at the core of this, that this is not just about designing something that comes as a fixed end, but this is about a process. This is about people. This is about learning and growing through time. And this is a place where that can happen. And that's a lot of the power of the falls. So as a framework for thinking what that can start to mean spatially, we have been interested in this idea of how can that diagram be made fairly literal, and the fact that you have such a distinct condition here, the upper falls, the river that comes to the falls itself, and then the lower, the gorge, the area below the falls as 3 key characters. Really, Blake, appreciated your deeper dive and detail into this, but it's been really in our minds just the bigness of the falls, the bigness of this river, that it isn't that one little piece in the middle. And you articulated that so well for us. But thinking about those characters of water, characters of the river, is something to work from. And don't have to go back through this in the same detail, but the fact that today, it doesn't mean those are gone, but there's a lot of stuff that adds confusion. There's a lot of stuff in the way. There's a lot that obscures or makes it hard to find that today. And that's maybe where a lot of that loss and feeling of loss is so strong there. So as I said, we've been thinking about this in terms of water first, trying to get ourselves to look at this in terms of water first. And, every one of these old paintings, which are often, evocative ways to try to imagine, again, what was happening here, what was this place. There's a really different condition illustrated of the water itself from this, and we're just using the term upper, lower in the falls or Womni, but knowing that there's, probably better language to develop around that. So starting with this idea of the upper river, you see that more mirror-like state, that calmer, fluid water with the shore coming right smoothly down. And today, we see some of that character of water. It's more pool-like, and here it's literally a pool. There's a softer edge. There's a little bit more of a gradual descent of that bank. So the area that we're talking about, and this of course is happening in related ways on the other side of the river too. Always good to remember this river is much bigger than this site. But seeing this area in particular from the Owamni restaurant and the Phase 1 Waterworks Park, and this whole shoreline edge, right? That's pretty close to the level of the water. And today, as we talked about last time, the water really has been divided up and split up into these different pools, which fed the mills and the lock and all of that, and are contained by different kinds of edges. While this is a more gradual shoreline, it still is, fortified with rocks to try to stabilize it. And then, of course, there's a lot of hard infrastructure today that you see in that magenta. And what is out there today, we're calling it the soft-ish edge. It's still fairly fluid down. It is fortified a bit, but you can see some of that shoreline condition happening here, and the water does actually fluctuate a bit in this zone. And comparing that to these other edges when we look out that are concrete walls and dams and barriers to contain water. And then, of course, the other reality of, while it is more of a fluid edge down topographically, there's a big fence running along of it, all of it. So, when we think about spatially what that could mean, or experientially, how could this place evolve to become, more of its what it wants to be? There's obviously policy things that have to be engaged, no access barriers and all of that. So when we look at this edge, one of the things that we were intrigued by is if this, shoreline was more gradual, was more soft and fluctuating, is that an opportunity to really think about the relationship between land and water access ecology up here in the upper, to really push how far could we bring this shoreline condition to a more productive and rich soft edge. And we know there's a lot of waterfowl birds that come through here because of that more pond-like, more softer, calmer waters, and the kinds of insects and plants that would live along that kind of riverbank. So just as an idea, and these are not specific proposals yet, these are just trying to understand the qualities of what might have been, the relationships that were supported by what was here before, and how we might start to adapt and think about transforming some of these moments to bring back that kind of life and complexity. So here, really saying, if this is about shore, can we really extend and expand that gradient down through here? Take advantage of the fact that this is sort of a strange pool today. Maybe we can continue to dismantle more of that. John, I think you touched on that sense that this is a series of steps and thinking about a larger transformation. So what are the steps that we can take maybe more immediately? In terms of the falls, obviously, very dynamic water. And we heard a lot about that today. It's not just that space in the middle, but it's a larger idea, a larger extent, but it's really challenged and limited by all of the layers and disruptions from the lock over through the mills. So impossible to see image, so I'll skip past it, but the idea of portage was a central idea to the falls, as we know, and that fact that this disruption in the flow of the water from the upper to the lower led to a different kind of gathering place, a different kind of collection of people and interaction. And that was really, the power of the falls, the spirit of the water brought people together in a different way, brought peoples together in a different way. And that's another thing that we're thinking about, that relationship between human activity and this place. How can the spirit of the falls come through that opportunity for gathering collective possibilities here, which obviously today is not very present in that parking lot. And then the lower falls, really different water than above. This is more turbulent. These great images as the water spilled down, that basic geology of the limestone blocks that would fall and erode, and water moving around them, creating the pools, the spirals. And, really a lot of what we're seeing here is not just that the falls were reconstructed, but the next dam down changed this from being a rapids of exposed falling water through rocks to essentially another pool-like condition. And that was a series of transformations that moved up and up the river to keep trying to push boats just a little bit further up the river, with drastic, influence and change. This is a photograph that I've always found to be really fascinating, because you see what now is that Mill Ruins Park sloped bank where the Stone Arches Bridge is coming out, was all built up as trestle over that. But that sense that there was a real verticality because you were in that more gorge-like condition, that topographic drama, I guess, that was there before, is slowly another one of those things that's slowly been kind of picked away as more layers have been built in and slopes have been stabilized and all of that. But just that sense of immersion and dropping into a place. And just for reference, this on the lower right is some of the fragments of Spirit Island. Oops, a little touchy here. So when we think about then this lower area, apologies, this is a little bit laggy. Similar to above, we have this condition where there's layers of pools separating the main channel of water to the side edge, which was once fed by the falls itself, then split off and isolated as the mill tunnel and powering the mills. But we have this condition where there's no life, as we've talked about last time, in this water. It's dead. For the most part, it's just trickling through and stagnant. And that's because it's cut off. And it's been isolated. And of course, the lock itself. When we see, again, this is another one of these great images, that relationship below that was unique as those pieces of limestone broke off and crumbled and held in the river, you had that presence of land in water, the islands, that was very different. And, there are islands certainly further up in the river too, but that kind of immersion and intensity of being right within the falls, but yet in this protected place was something that a lot of these accounts have. And, again, Blake, I think you told this story better, but one of the challenges has been over time, this clarity of a large falls, moments within the water, the river, slowly have been erased and confused. Is this an island? Is this a part of the shore? What is this? It's all sort of been disrupted and confused, quite frankly. So I think one of the big opportunities we see is to try to amplify and draw back those distinct qualities and characters of land and water throughout here as a way to regain that story or make it presence again. And the drawdown that happened, I guess, 2 years ago, where essentially they let the water pass through that lower dam, lowered the water level in this area more like it maybe would have been prior to the construction of those sequence of pools. And suddenly you see, this variety of stone and water and more dynamic conditions and a different kind of access. And so this is another one of those cases where you see what seems as though it were fully erased is maybe just below the surface. And we can find ways to access that and bring more of that complexity and richness back. Just another view of that edge. And of course, the story of Spirit Island and its destruction and erasure, step by step along the way, is just something we keep in our minds too in this, and think about what that means for the future. So, that complexity of land, water here, while we would have had more variety, more intricacy, more rocks, more pools, we still now have sort of just stagnant water and a lot of walls along this edge, which keep water in theory moving in a predictable manner. But that's not really what this place is about in that one point of direct connection. And of course, there's more diversity of life in these more diverse conditions down in the lower area below the falls. So here, thinking, and again, there's so much opportunity, but what can we do to break maybe some of those hardened edges down, knowing that there's ruins underneath that will be a part of the story, but is there an opportunity to regain, again, more of that complexity and interface and intricacy of conditions? So that's, how we've been thinking about just, again, this project of trying to see and understand what's there, what could have been there, what might want to be there again. And this framework of thinking, can we build on this as the upper river, the falls itself, and then the lower river as three distinct characters connected together that can engage this project. And so one of the first things we think about here is, within these, is there a way to reconnect to this water? I think, John, you asked that question earlier. Can we draw water back through here? One of the most fundamental things that we could do if we begin with water, and we say the water has been disrupted, the water has been cut off, the water is, stagnant, what can we do to start to bring back the water through this zone? Whether it's bringing more water through the mill tunnels and actually just feeding more water into the lower area. Can we bring more water through the lock itself and over that opening, which is a gate today, and it's doing things functionally, so we're not naive to the complexity of all this, but most fundamentally, can we bring that water back through? And if we start to bring that water back through, is there an opportunity, and we're not trying to map out every piece of historical land here necessarily, but is there an opportunity to start to presence the fact that this distinct quality of being below the falls in that lower area where you're actually, especially to Spirit Island, moving through the water to get to this place? Is there a way to bring that kind of clarity and experience back, that this isn't all just one shoreline that's glommed the industrial and the transformation of all that together, but experientially, could you start to know that experience, even if it's not, exactly the edge that was once there? And then, thinking about how do we start to draw people together? Can we come by water? We obviously have the primary movement of streets and the waterfront and the Stone Arches Bridge. There's a real convergence that happens here, and that's, a natural sort of landing point up above. But then we start to think, are there opportunities from that convergence at the falls to find other loops and other paths? And Shelley, one of the things that really struck me in what you were sharing earlier, this idea that it's painful for people to come here, and we need to think about welcome. How do we start to imagine that welcoming place to come to, and then just a sense of journey, and in knowing this is going to be an intense experience for many that come? How do you start to imagine a place that supports that journey and process of connecting? And that'll mean different things for different people. So, imagining characters and experiences, identities, that contrast. And part of what we're trying to propose is that it would be good to help contrast the things that today are fuzzy and sort of all stuck together. Really talking about the upper river, more open to the sky, more exposed, elevated, a shoreline that has fluidity and connection between water and land, a place that's very easy and fluid to move across. The moment of the falls, acknowledging the story of disruption here, but also that disruption and that shift is a bigger story that has to do with portage and gathering and a reason that people came together here. Is that power? And how can we bring back the presence and intensity of the water, the sound of the water, the light of the water, all of these phenomena, how can those support that understanding? And is this, a place for gathering and collection? We've heard through previous conversations, talk about language center or a place to meet, or, you know, different kinds of gatherings? Is the falls still, you know, that place, that idea of that portage bringing people together? Does the falls take that on in new ways today while also bringing water through? And then if the upper river is more exposed, more fluid between the daily life of the shore and the water, is this idea of the lower river, the below the falls, more immersive, more of a journey, more personal and individual, um, as a way to talk about that story and what that experience might have been? You're dropping down, you know, you're moving down, you're in a different quality of water and complexity and all of that. So again, you know, just a reminder, that upper river edge, how to start to draw that together, and just bring that contact in. You know, maybe again, some of these other barriers, walls can start to break down with time. We don't know at this point, but that idea of a fluid connection could be meaningful. And you can just start to imagine how that ability to soften and connect could be a really strong opportunity for daily contact just with the river, living with the river. And you know, some of the kinds of activities and opportunities, again, there's a lot of content here, and we're probably already past time, but you know, we've heard about foraging, we've heard about places for teaching, for demonstration, canoes. You know, there's a lot of opportunity for that could be unique to this part of the river, or this kind of condition of the river, I should say. This could happen at other places as well. But not wanting to just think about program as recreation, but as, you know, the idea of this is the quality of the water, the broader species life supporting of this condition, as well as then additional kinds of activities and connection building. The falls itself, as we said, you know, this place that's so cut off and isolated today really may be a place to focus on gathering and coming together and linking. And so, you know, imagining, you know, the reality that the lock is there today, maybe it's not there for forever, but that's a part of that story of disruption. We need to think about how that comes together. But, you know, a place for dialogue, a place for language, a place for different kinds of gatherings in the presence of the falls, which means, I think, you know, really challenging ourselves to say, how can we bring that water back through? The irony of what's there right now is you come through here and you're surrounded by concrete walls. You have, you know, no idea that there's even a river there, let alone, you know, this amazing presence of the waterfall that was once flowing, as we saw earlier, right through here. So how do we leverage that power again as a broader opportunity? And thinking about, you know, I think a big question that we should try to get some thought on is, you know, what kind of support in infrastructure and resource does this place want longer term to support these kind of activities? If this is a place of gathering, do we want to imagine, you know, an open, flexible landscape where there can be gathering? Do we need more infrastructure, more support? Do we even need a building? And I'm, you know, being very direct sort of in that spectrum. But it would be good for us to be thinking about, you know, just in terms of things to explore next, the range of opportunities, resource, to support the kind of program and identity of this place. Again, knowing that this is a moment in a much larger discussion around the river, but it is that gathering place, right? It is the falls. And then when we think about, you know, this idea of the lower falls and, you know, that immersion, that moving down in, you know, are there big trees? Are there, is there that reforested kind of sense of what the islands once were? Again, we're not recreating that, but is there an opportunity to find that kind of experience here, which would be very different than moving up along the top of the bluff? And bringing back that moving water, that dynamic water that supports a whole different range of life. You know, the idea of a place for ceremony, we heard in our last discussion, let's not fix one spot, but let's really open this land up with the range of opportunities and conditions so it can happen where it wants and needs to happen. so that becomes, part of, I think, the opportunity here to discover. And again, this is in no way suggesting this is exactly what it should look like, but only as an idea, thinking through that shore, that connected edge, that bigger relationship above, that convergence and gathering and movement of water at the falls, and then that ability potentially to really start to bring water through and add complexity to these edges and soften and come down to the water. And then I think, a big question is Spirit Island. Is there, how is that marked? How is that presence? How is that accessed? I think there's lots of different ways that could go forward. But when you start to look at that moment in this larger falls, which I think we all have in our mind right now, in the larger river, just how absolutely important that moment is. And we'll want to keep thinking about that. So that's what we had prepared to discuss today. I think really, obviously, as always, appreciate the broader discussion. We're not bringing options to choose one today, but really wanting to continue this dialogue and building on the thinking and conversations that we've been having.
One of the things I've noticed that sometimes gets missed from the conversation, maybe, and maybe not. Maybe people are already thinking about it, but I think about the habitat of the turtles or the different animals that may have found a home there that we might be, disrupting again by making it a little too nice for everybody else. And so that would be, I guess what you'd say, the environmental impact that I'd appreciate. I mean, I'd hope that we'd think about, we're doing work on Oheoahe and, talking just about the path and stuff. And I went and did a walk up there and I saw all the places where the deer and, all the little animals that live up there. And that's their one oasis in that whole spot. And you feel like that would be really bad to be putting a path through here and disrupting them just for the sake of us wanting to have a path through here. And, so it's just something I thought about when you were showing that first picture there. I definitely love spaces that are accessible that you can gather in. I mean, I'm not against that idea, but I also, really want to try and speak for the, turtles or anything that is using these places as a way to, to flourish or grow as well,
Rights of nature. Yep. Speaking for those that cannot speak for themselves is the way that I've heard it stated. So really good point, Juanita. I'm just amazed at all of this work. I appreciate you and your team, David, a lot. Between the two presentations today, my mind is just blown, and you guys have really opened up the potential of, let's say that. I mean, all these months of discussion and all of that really have landed in the center of all of this, and I just love it. I appreciate it so much, and I think that once we start sharing this out, I think our members of our NPC will have an idea of what the potential is, and I don't know. I just think it's a great way to really open it up for, all of that. Any other comments, questions for David? We actually are really on time. So we've got a couple more minutes to have a conversation or ask questions or comments or anything on this at this point.
Hey, John, I see you've got your hand raised.
Yeah, I was just going to, first address Juanita's point. Sometimes, Juanita, when I've been involved in restoration projects, if you do the timing of the construction right, you can do it so you don't disrupt the birds or the insects or the turtles, because if you do it while they're hibernating or while they're using other habitats, that's a way to get around some of that destruction. And then when they come back, they find something that's even more pleasurable than what they, more resources than what they had before. The other thing I was going to say, I love the drawings. Interesting idea to parse it out. I hadn't thought about it as upper, middle, and lower, but I think all your notions about gathering in the center and place for reflection lower and increased habitat, I think that's all really, really nicely done. So thank you for that. And being one who draws all the time, I love the drawings. So
Yeah.
Thanks, John.
I don't see any more little hands. Anybody want to jump in and any final comments on this? Phenomenal. I just think all this is just so awesome. Robert.
Yeah, thanks, Carrie, and thanks, David, for presenting this. And it was kind of holding back. Oh, yay. Thanks, Mona, for those applause, because I wanted to hear more from Native Partnership Council members. But
Yeah.
I do want to just 2 comments. One, I agree with John, the drawings were great. And then that photo that was kind of a mashup, or some of it was photo, I think some was drawing, that kind of, you know, showed what could be. That just I just really responded to that, just because it's like, oh, I wish that's how it was you know, now. And
Right.
so just that was really powerful to me. And the other thing, David, I just want to really note this, because I think it's especially important to hear non-native people say stuff like this. And you made this statement that could apply so more broadly to sort of colonization, and then certainly the reintroduction, maybe the lack of, you know, the healing the disruption within Native communities, as far as folks claiming language, culture, place, things like that. And what you said was, and it was so, it resonated with me so strongly, David, that I wrote it down word for word. And you said, you were talking about the river, of course, but you said, what seems like it was totally erased still exists below the surface. And that could talk about colonization in general, things that Native people did to survive, to still be here today. Never really went away. It was just hidden, and sometimes hidden very, very, very well, maybe too well. And so as we just, I don't know, that just really resonated.
Agree. Very much agree. Wow, guys, our time is marching on here. I just think that just takes a little while to digest all this, but it's in all of this has just been so phenomenal. I can't appreciate you all enough for all the work and the comments. And, you know, again, I, you know, open it up, you know, one more time before we move on to our Native Partnership Council members, if they've got any other comments or questions or anything. I can see in the chat that Shelley is saying, great job. Can't wait to see more as it progresses. I agree. And I really appreciate that David and his team are listening. These are all things that we've talked about, and it's amazing. And I think that's the amazing part for me, is that, you know, we're having these conversations, but then all of a sudden, here it is in front of us like this. It's just amazing. Yeah, I just think it's all such great work. So, and always, you guys can, you know, shoot me an email or any kind of afterthoughts. Before we leave, I was just wondering, you know, when we were looking at that drawdown, you know, of the water going down, I just wanted to know, how did that affect our other places, like at your place down there, Maggie? How did that drawdown affect you all, and how did it affect anybody else down the way? Did all the water go down like that? I don't know about how that works. I mean, it just seems like there'd be a lot of exposed places.
Yeah, I mean, I still how all of this connects and how this affected, you know, places along the river, I'm still trying to understand more about as well.
Yeah. And just think, the old Indians, they knew about how all this worked without all this technology. They just listened to Mother Nature and how she directed us, you know, and we didn't need all that stuff. You know, they knew that if you did this thing over here, that this was going to happen, you know. So it's just amazing stuff. So I appreciate that, and I appreciate all you guys. Send comments, questions, anything else afterwards, and we'll move on.